Emily Hart had always lived the kind of life people described as stable. She had a tidy apartment, a good job at a marketing firm in Portland, and a small circle of friends who checked on her every now and then. On paper, everything looked perfect. But in her quiet moments, when the city lights dimmed and the world went still, Emily felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't sadness, not really. It was the quiet ache of a life without spark. Every day felt the same, and though nothing was wrong, nothing truly felt right either. Her mornings began with the same alarm tone, the same breakfast, the same walk to work. She knew the faces at the coffee shop, the sound of the traffic lights beep, even the timing of the bus driver's sigh when someone paid in coins. Life was predictable, safe, but dull. She told herself this was what adulthood meant: comfort, control, and no surprises. Yet deep down, she longed for something more, something that made her heart race again. That Thursday evening, a rain poured across the city, turning the streets into mirrors. Emily sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching droplets slide down the glass. The sound of rain had always soothed her, but tonight it only deepened the silence inside her chest. Her apartment was warm, cozy even, but she felt miles away from her own life. She looked around: the same framed photos, the same books neatly arranged, the same half-written journal on her desk. Each object reminded her of how carefully she avoided change. Her phone buzzed. It was Clara, her best friend since college, sending another voice note. Clara was everything Emily wasn't: spontaneous, bold, full of stories that sounded like scenes from a movie. She'd moved to Seattle, started a small art studio, and always seemed to live in motion. Emily played the message. Clara's voice was cheerful as always. You need to stop planning everything. Life doesn't happen when you're comfortable. It happens when you're scared, when you try something new. Come visit me this weekend or try something random. Do anything that breaks your routine." Emily smiled faintly, but didn't reply. She admired Clara's courage, yet she couldn't imagine living like that. Still, those words stuck in her head. Life doesn't happen when you're comfortable. Hours passed, and Emily found herself sitting on the floor beside her couch, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures from her college years, her first trip abroad, her birthday with friends, all moments filled with light and laughter. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd felt that kind of energy. Somewhere along the way, she had traded excitement for safety, and though it kept her heart from breaking, it also kept it from truly feeling. She stood up and walked to the mirror. Her reflection looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from living too quietly. "What happened to you?" she whispered. It wasn't self-pity, just realization. She wasn't unhappy. She was unalive in her own story. Later that night, she sat on her couch and opened her journal. The last entry was from 2 months ago, a list of goals she hadn't touched. She flipped the page and wrote slowly, "I think I forgot how to live. Maybe it's time to try something new." The words surprised her, but they felt right. She didn't know what something new meant yet, but for the first time in years, she felt a spark. It was small, like a flicker of light in darkness, but it was enough to make her heart beat differently. She wanted to try. The next morning, Emily walked to work with a different kind of awareness. The same city she'd passed 1,000 times suddenly looked alive. The smell of roasted coffee, the chatter of strangers, the gray sky, it all seemed fresh, as if life had been waiting for her to notice. At lunch, she told her colleague, Mia, that she was thinking about taking a weekend trip alone. Mia looked surprised. "You traveling solo? That's new." Emily laughed softly. "Exactly. That's the point." That night, she didn't go straight home after work. She stopped by a small bookstore she always passed but never entered. The smell of old paper and soft music filled the air. She wandered through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of books. She picked one at random, a travel memoir about a woman who left her city life behind to chase her dreams. On the first page, a quote caught her eye: "The greatest risk is staying where you don't belong." She bought it without hesitation. Back home, she made dinner and sat on the floor again, reading by candlelight as rain tapped the windows. The story pulled her in, but more than that, it reminded her that people grow only when they allow themselves to try. She closed the book halfway and stared at the city lights outside. For years, she'd been watching others live, the couples laughing under umbrellas, the artists painting in cafes, the travelers posting pictures from new places, while she convinced herself that she was content being the observer. But that night, something shifted. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was Clara's words, or maybe it was just time. Emily realized that playing it safe had kept her from getting hurt, but it had also kept her from joy, connection, and love. Before going to bed, she opened her laptop and searched for local events, classes, and meets, anything that might push her outside her comfort zone. She didn't know where it would lead, but she felt a pull, a quiet curiosity to see what waited beyond her routine. As she scrolled, her eyes landed on a small art exhibition opening downtown the following week. She hesitated, then smiled. It wasn't her usual scene, but maybe that was the point. She booked a ticket. When she turned off the lights, she lay in bed feeling something new: nervous, excitement. She had no plan, no expectation, just a decision to stop being afraid of life outside. The rain finally stopped, and moonlight filled her room. Emily whispered to herself, maybe this is how it starts. Not with a big change, but with a small choice. She closed her eyes, unaware that a week later, in that very art exhibition, she would meet someone who would change everything she thought she knew about love, risk, and what it truly means to live. That night, for the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel like an outsider in her own life. She didn't know where this path would take her, but she knew one thing for sure: she was ready to experience it. And in that quiet, hopeful moment, she realized the truth Clara had been trying to tell her all along. Life doesn't teach through plans. It teaches through experiences. Emily had finally decided to try one the following Saturday. Emily woke to soft sunlight spilling through her curtains. She had no weekend plans, no chores, no deadlines, no errands, and for once, she didn't feel guilty about it. The city outside her window was calm after a week of steady rain. She felt a strange pull to go out, to be somewhere unfamiliar. Maybe this was her chance to try something new. She dressed simple jeans, a beige sweater, hair in a loose band, walked toward downtown Portland. The air was crisp, and the streets still glistened with puddles. On the corner of Alder Street, she noticed a cafe she'd never entered before. It was small, with warm lighting, wooden chairs, and the faint sound of jazz drifting through the open door. The sign above read Calf Briarwood. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee wrapped around her as she entered. A few people sat quietly typing, reading, or lost in their thoughts. Emily found a seat near the window, her favorite kind of spot. She ordered a caramel latte and took out the travel memoir she had started earlier that week. For a few minutes, she read peacefully, but her attention kept drifting. She looked up, and that's when she noticed him. A man sat across the room at a small corner table, sketching something in a black notebook. His sleeves were rolled up, and a faint shadow of stubble lined his jaw. He wasn't posing or trying to look interesting. He just was. His concentration was calm, almost magnetic. Emily watched as his pencil moved with ease, as if he was drawing something important. Then, unexpectedly, he looked up. Their eyes met. It wasn't awkward or rushed. It was steady, warm, and curious. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that felt genuine, like he'd just seen something familiar in a stranger. Emily quickly looked down at her book, pretending to read, but her heart gave a quiet flutter. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps. She looked up again. He was walking toward her, holding his coffee and that same notebook. "You look like someone who appreciates quiet corners," he said softly, with a friendly grin. His voice had that kind of warmth that instantly put her at ease. Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. "I guess I do," she said, smiling back. "Good choice," he said, glancing at the empty chair beside her. "Mind if I sit?" She nodded, trying not to seem nervous. "Sure." He sat down and set his sketchbook on the table. "I'm Noah," he said. "Noah Reed." "Emily," she replied. Noah glanced at her book. "Travel stories." "You planning a trip?" "Not yet." she said. Just trying to remember what living feels like? He tilted his head, curious. That's an interesting reason to read. She laughed softly. Yeah, I'm full of interesting reasons lately. Their conversation began lightly about books, coffee, and how Portland never seemed to run out of rain. But soon it grew deeper. Noah told her he was an illustrator working on a small art project for a local gallery. He'd moved to the city a few months ago, renting a studio nearby. I draw people I notice, he said. Not models, just people who look like they have stories, Emily asked, half joking. Do I look like one of them? He smiled. You look like someone who's about to start a new chapter. She didn't know why, but his words made her heart skip. Maybe because they felt too true. As they talked, the cafe buzz faded around them. Time blurred into soft laughter and shared thoughts. Noah had a calm way of speaking, not rushed, not forced. He listened deeply, asked questions that made Emily think. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone in a long time, about feeling stuck, about wanting change, about fearing it to. When she realized how open she'd become, she paused. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk so much. Noah smiled gently. Don't apologize. Most people don't talk, they just make noise. You're sharing something real. His words stayed with her. After a while, Noah flipped open his sketchbook. Inside were portraits, faces of strangers, moments captured in pencil. There was something intimate yet kind about his drawings. He turned to a blank page. Can I? He asked. Emily hesitated. Draw me? Just for practice, he said, smiling. You have that look, half lost, half curious. She couldn't help but laugh. That sounds accurate. He began to sketch as they continued talking. The moment felt strange, but beautiful, quiet, comfortable, alive. She watched him draw, noticing the little frown he made when focusing. The way his eyes flicked between her and the paper. When he finished, he tore out the small sheet and handed it to her. It was simple but full of feeling. Her eyes, her faint smile, the way she leaned slightly forward, it was her. But softer, more honest somehow. Wow, she whispered. That's actually really good. He smiled modestly. Keep it. Maybe it'll remind you to keep trying new things. When she looked down, she noticed a few words scribbled on the bottom of the napkin. Life's better when you collect stories, not when you hide from them. By the time she looked up again, Noah was glancing at his watch. I should get going, he said, standing. But hey, if you ever want to talk again, or if you need a guide to Portland's quiet corners here. He handed her a small card with his number written on it. Emily took it, her fingers brushing his for a brief second. Thank you, she said softly. Don't thank me yet, he said with a grin. Wait until you've had your first adventure. Then he walked out into the afternoon sunlight, leaving the faint scent of coffee and rain behind. Emily sat there holding the sketch, staring at the door he'd just walked through. She wasn't sure what she was feeling, excitement, confusion, hope, but it was real, alive. And new. That night she couldn't stop thinking about him. She laid the drawing on her nightstand, staring at it before bed. Something about Noah's words echoed inside her. Collect stories. Don't hide from them. The next morning, after a few minutes of hesitation, she picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed, Hi, it's Emily. I tried the cafe again this morning. It's quieter without you sketching in the corner. A few seconds later, her phone buzzed. Noah replied, Then I guess I'll have to fix that. Tomorrow, same time. Emily smiled, feeling warmth rise in her chest. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to something she couldn't predict. She didn't know where this would lead. But she knew one thing: this, right here, was the experience she had promised herself to try. And somehow, it already felt like the beginning of something she didn't know she'd been waiting for. Emily didn't expect their coffee meeting to turn into a routine. But that's exactly what happened. One meeting became two, two became four, and soon Noah had quietly become a part of her days. Every time they met, she felt more awake to the world, more aware of how much life she had missed while hiding in her comfort zone, Their moments together weren't grand or dramatic, they were simple, almost ordinary, but each one felt meaningful. They would walk through Portland's riverside paths, stopping to watch the water shimmer beneath the bridges. Noah would point out the way sunlight hit the trees, or how strangers' laughter could change the mood of a street. Art isn't just what you draw, he once said, it's what you notice. Emily listened, learning to see through his eyes. She began noticing details too: the smell of rain before a storm, the texture of old buildings, the calm faces of people lost in thought. Being around Noah made her pay attention, not just to the world, but to herself. Sometimes they sat quietly for long minutes, saying nothing. It wasn't uncomfortable, it felt peaceful. Emily found comfort in his presence, like she didn't need to perform or pretend. One afternoon they sat by the river, both watching the sky fade into soft orange. Noah leaned back and said, "You know, most people think peace comes from control, but it actually comes from letting go." She turned to him, curious. "Letting go of what?" "Everything you're afraid to lose," said simply. His words lingered in her heart long after that day. They started meeting in all kinds of places. The art gallery where his drawings were displayed, the local bookstore she loved, even grocery store aisles when they bumped into each other unexpectedly. With every encounter, Emily felt more drawn to him. She couldn't explain it. He wasn't like anyone she had known. He didn't chase her or make promises. He just showed up, listened, and made her feel seen. One evening, after a long walk, they ended up at the old cafe where they first met. Rain began to fall outside, soft and rhythmic. They sat near the window, sharing a slice of pie. Emily found herself studying him, the way he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, the quiet smile he gave when she said something funny. "You look like you're sketching me in your head again," she teased. He laughed. "Maybe you're interesting to look at." Her cheeks warmed. "Interesting. In a good way," he said, smiling. "You have that look like you're learning how to live again." She smiled too, though her heart raced a little. "Maybe I am." They fell into silence, and for a moment their eyes met and held. There was no need for words. The air between them felt heavy with meaning, not uncomfortable, but alive. Emily wasn't sure if it was attraction, affection, or something deeper, but she knew it mattered. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. They shared stories about their past, his childhood in Chicago, her small-town memories, their regrets and half-finished dreams. Noah told her how he once gave up a secure job to follow his passion for art. "Everyone told me I was being reckless," he said. "Maybe I was. But sometimes comfort is just another word for fear." Emily nodded quietly. She knew that feeling too well. One night as they walked home, Noah asked, "What's one thing you've always wanted to do but never tried?" Emily thought for a moment. "Sing. Not professionally, just sing in front of people. But I always thought I wasn't good enough." "Then sing," he said simply. "Don't wait to be perfect. Just do it because it's you." His faith in her made her laugh. "You make it sound easy. It's not," he said. "But life rarely is. Try anyway." That same weekend, she went to a small open mic night at a cafe. She didn't tell him, didn't invite anyone, just walked up and sang quietly, her voice trembling but real. When she finished, a few people clapped softly. She didn't care about the applause, she cared that she did it. Later, she texted Noah, "I tried something new tonight." "You were right, it felt good." He replied instantly, "Told you. You're starting to live your story." The weeks rolled by, and Emily felt herself changing. She laughed more, worried less, and began painting in her spare time, inspired by Noah's art. Her apartment, once silent and neat, now had sketches pinned to the wall and unfinished ideas scattered on the desk. It felt alive, like her. But as close as they grew, Emily also sensed something behind Noah's calm, something he didn't say. Sometimes he'd fall quiet in the middle of a conversation, staring out a window as if lost in thought. When she asked, he'd smile faintly and say, "Just thinking about what comes next." One crisp evening, as they sat by the riverside again, the city glowing behind them, Noah turned to her. "Emily," he began softly, "have you ever done something just because it felt right? Not because it made sense?" She met his gaze. "I'm doing it right now," she said. He smiled. But there was a flicker of sadness in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. That night, when he walked her home, she wanted to say something maybe about how much he had changed her life, or how she didn't want this to end, but she stayed quiet. Sometimes silence felt safer than honesty. The next morning, Emily woke up with an unusual feeling, a mix of happiness and worry. Noah hadn't texted. She brushed it off, assuming he was busy. But by evening, she still hadn't heard from him. 2 days passed. Then 3. Finally, he called. His voice was calm but distant, almost careful. "Hey, can we meet tomorrow? I need to tell you something." Her heart tightened. "Of course," she said, trying to sound normal. That night she couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment they'd shared, every smile, every pause, wondering what he wanted to say. She didn't want to think about endings, but deep down, she feared one was coming. When they met the next day, the cafe felt different, colder somehow. Noah looked thoughtful, almost burdened. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I got an offer," he said quietly. "A project in California. It's big, something I've dreamed about for years." Emily felt her chest tighten. "That's amazing," she said softly, though her voice wavered. "Yeah," he said. It's everything I've worked for." He paused. "But it means I'll have to leave soon." When they met the next day, the cafe felt different, colder somehow. Noah looked thoughtful, almost burdened. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I got an offer," he said quietly. "A project in California. It's big, something I've dreamed about for years." Emily felt her chest tighten. "That's amazing," she said softly, though her voice wavered. "Yeah," he said. It's everything I've worked for." He paused. "But it means I'll have to leave soon." The silence between them grew heavy. Emily looked down, trying to steady her breath. She wanted to be proud of him, but the thought of losing him hurt in a way she hadn't expected. Noah reached across the table, his hand brushing hers lightly. "You told me life needs experiences to learn," he said. "Well, this was mine. Meeting you reminded me what connection feels like again." She blinked away the sting in her eyes. "And you reminded me what living feels like." They both smiled faintly, two people caught between joy and goodbye. When he walked her home that evening, the city lights reflected in puddles on the ground. Emily wanted to say, "Stay," but she didn't. She understood now that life wasn't about holding on. It was about learning, growing, and letting go when the moment came. As she stood by her door, Noah looked at her one last time. "Don't stop trying new things, okay? Promise me." She nodded. "I promise." He smiled, stepped back, and disappeared into the fading night. Emily stood there, heart heavy but full. The ache was real, but so was the gratitude. Because even if this story didn't last forever, it had already changed who she was. And for the first time in her life, she understood love itself is an experience. She was finally living it. The day Noah left Portland was cold and gray. It's a kind of morning when the city felt half asleep. Emily stood by her window, watching people hurry along the wet streets below. She held her coffee tightly, not for warmth, but for comfort. Noah's flight was in 2 hours. He had texted her earlier, thanking her for making Portland feel like home. The message was short, gentle, and final. She wanted to reply something meaningful, but every word felt small compared to what she felt. So she didn't reply at all. Instead, she stood there quietly, watching the city she'd lived in for years suddenly look unfamiliar because, for the first time, someone she cared about deeply wasn't in it anymore. The last few days had moved too fast. After Noah told her about the offer in California, they met only twice more. They didn't talk much about the future. Both knew it would be unfair to make promises. He had his dreams to chase, and she had her own journey to continue. But even in those brief moments, their silences were full of unspoken meaning. Their final meeting had been at the cafe where they first met. It was late evening and rain drummed gently against the windows. They sat at their old corner table, hands wrapped around warm cups of coffee. The conversation flowed softly memories, laughter, stories that would soon turn into nostalgia. At one point, Noah reached across the table and held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles over her skin. "You changed me, he said. Emily looked up, eyes uncertain. "How?" "You reminded me that there's more to life than chasing goals. That sometimes the quiet moments like this matter just as much." She smiled faintly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "And you reminded me that it's okay to start living again." They didn't say much after that. There was no confession, no dramatic ending, just a people quietly acknowledging that they had met at the right time, even if it couldn't last. When they finally said goodbye, it wasn't with tears, but with gratitude. He hugged her tightly and whispered, "Keep trying new things, Emily. Don't go back to just existing." Now, standing by her window days later, those words replayed in her mind. Life didn't stop after he left, but something in her shifted. She began spending more time outdoors walking by the river they once visited. Going to the bookstore alone, sometimes sitting at the cafe where they had met. It hurt at first seeing the empty seat across from her. But slowly, the ache turned into warmth. The memories stopped feeling like loss. They started feeling like lessons. She started painting again, not for anyone but herself. Her first piece was simple an outline of 2 coffee cups under a rainy window. She hung it above her desk, smiling every time she passed by it. It reminded her not of heartbreak, but of connection, of how one small choice to step out of her comfort zone had led to a story that changed her. Weeks turned into months. Winter arrived, then softened into spring. Emily had changed in quiet ways. She was still the same person, but lighter somehow. She smiled more, laughed easily, and talked to strangers without hesitation.